So Dr. Filipova is a senior manager of data science at GitHub, and she investigates distributed work, particularly open source development, and considers what lives at the intersection of digital and physical spaces and software communities. And she's also interested in how communities acquire norms, which we read about a little bit today, or saw in your talk, I should say, and how these evolve over time and what impact they have on community success. And she's also interested in diversity, which was a topic we had in a workshop from last week. So it's great to have you here today, Anna. Anna did her PhD on free and open source software and conflict at the National University of Singapore, and she was a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon. And I first met Anna, I think we were at a conference, right? CSCW at the end of your PhD. And it's great that we've managed to stay in touch since then. So I'm thrilled that you agreed to visit us today. So in preparation for our class today, thank you so much for sharing with us the keynote that you gave recently at the conference. So we watched that, and together we came up with a set of questions for you. So I'm going to go through these questions. They're sorted sort of loosely by theme a little bit, and we'll see where we get in the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes. So the first few questions that I wanted to ask is from Nimi. If Nimi is there, would you like to join?
Yeah, sure.
Great. And yeah, I should say these first few questions are about group dynamics and team building kind of loosely. Nimi.
Yeah, my question was recruiting team members for an IT team is a solution to control group dynamics by increasing the heterogeneity. What are the other solutions that you can think of, like controlling the group dynamics of IT team?
It's a really good question. And I also wanted to say, I was very blown away by the questions that y'all put in. I took a sneak peek last night as Peggy was putting them together. So thanks all for the great questions. I hope we get to some of them, but these are really good ones. I appreciate you keeping me on my toes. So let's try and dig into this first one. Something that I think about when it comes to heterogeneity is that folks on a team aren't just the sum of the characteristics that they bring with them. Everyone has unique life experiences, unique hobbies, interests, situations in life. And one of the ways to bring out that heterogeneity in a team is to focus on some of those. You both build bridges between folks on who may not have realized that they have shared experiences. And you're also considering how to reduce the number of fault lines that may exist in a given team. So a quintessential example I give is one of just hobbies, folks not realizing that they both love to play soccer or are interested in van life or things like that. And a lot of water cooler conversation gets you there in face-to-face settings. That's one of the things that helps build kind of richer relationships. And so how do you simulate that in a distributed setting is one of the most important questions. So some things we do that are really simple are really regular icebreakers, random things. Today in a staff meeting, we applied that really directly. We talked about different folks' favorite holidays, and that became a very interesting insight into different folks' culture and things like that. So if you look at our team on the surface, it may not be as heterogeneous as it sounds, but once we get into topics like that, it becomes really very colorful and diverse.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nimi, for that question. Still along the same topic, I'm going to invite Sarush to join in and ask. Yeah.
Hi. My question is really close to Nimi's question. I think you sort of answered it by now, but in theory, it's we talk about increasing inclusion and like bring all the people together and like they feel they're included and we don't have boundaries between like different groups in our team. But are there like set of practices that actually we can do it? Because we know like we have to do some stuff to like feel everyone there included, but are there like actual like practical examples for this?
Also, excellent question. And I have a slight bias towards practice here right now because I'm going through this exercise with a team right now. So if you forgive me, I'm going to alternate a little bit between theory and color it very, very heavily with my own experience and hope that gets you kind of an interesting response. But something we're actually doing in that vein right now with a team is we brought together 3 teams that used to work very individually and independently from each other in kind of different parts of the organization, and are trying to align them across along a similar mission. So this is really where kind of breaking down some of those boundaries is going to be important, because folks are used to working together in these separate pods. And there's a little bit of an us versus them mentality that had established because some of these teams were not always kind of in sync in terms of the things that they were doing. So how do you start building bridges and creating a common identity in this group? Is it enough to put everyone in the same meeting, you know, call them by the same name, put them in the same kind of bucket and give them the same mission statement? And the intuition is probably not quite. There's probably more you need to do there. So there's a few things that we're trying to tackle. One is aligning folks around a common vision and painting a picture for how each group contributes to that vision. So part of what is closely enmeshed in identity is a sense of shared goals and a sense of shared objectives, a sense of shared principles. And so kind of refocusing on that tends to help a lot. The other thing that we're doing to help is we're rethinking some of the process. So each team has its own process for how it does something, and trying to reduce barriers there. So we're forcing everyone, literally forcing everyone through a really painful common on-call rotation. For some folks, that's an entirely new experience. Some folks have been doing this for a long time. And the really fun part about it is we're having people write the process as they're going through it, so they feel like they're a part of the process as we're developing it. And that agency to shape some of that experience, I've found to be really valuable in kind of developing that common identity. So you're both kind of going through this fire together, but at the same time, you're kind of building the process. You're building the ship as you're sailing it, and you're doing it with people that you're getting to know and getting to work with. So it enables a lot of those initial barriers to be crushed, and also sharing context between teams. So that's about as concrete as an example as I can think of for that.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I love that example. I mean, I love any example to do with boats, honestly, but but I love the idea of sort of reflecting, right, and writing the process as you go. That is super cool. I'm going to jump in and ask Tomas's question. So he says, nowadays, majority of employees start to work remotely in teams, which we all know. Do you have any tips for teams which are new, I guess, to working with each other to bridge different identity tensions? And maybe what you just said would be one way, but maybe if you have other ideas.
Yeah, also a really good question. Also very topical. I have someone who just started on my team, so this is very top of mind for me. How do I help them integrate? And how do I make sure that folks across different time zones feel like they are able to feel like a part of the same team, is also, I think, kind of enmeshed in some of that question. To put it directly, are we talking pre or post COVID?
I think
because the answer might change.
Yeah, I think Tomas probably meant post, I think.
Post, yeah.
Post. He said post.
So yeah, I see that in your comments. So assuming we don't have the benefit of getting together in person, as one might assume, as soon as you bring a new team member on board, you all kind of get together. How do you make folks feel like they're a part of a broader whole? So there's a few layers to that. Helping you feel like you're part of a team, helping you feel like you're a part of the organization is also important. And there's a couple of things I've seen us try and pivot towards to address that are kind of connected to this theme of identity and belonging. So one is putting everyone through the same onboarding process at like an organizational level. So belonging to an organization, if that's something that's important to you, and having that be, even if it's not specific to everyone all the time, but having that be consistent creates surprisingly strong bonds that persist throughout folks' time in a group or in an organization. So for instance, the onboarding process at GitHub is extremely rich with detail and information. You're literally drinking from the fire hose for the first 2 weeks or so, and that's all you're doing. You're just absorbing information, but everyone is absorbing all of the information at the same time. So, you know, I run a team of data scientists and data engineers, but everybody goes through the same software engineering onboarding process together with engineers who work on .com. So everybody gets the same context and background. When we think about onboarding for the team specifically, we also think about how to make that a streamlined and kind of standardized experience so that everyone has a good supporting structure. So you always know where you are and what you're doing. So when it comes to process, we prefer to write things down and have you kind of go through and check off a list of things that you're onboarding so you can take your time. And then social interaction, face-to-face interactions become social. So you set up a lot of time one-on-one, and all of the time that you spend kind of in meetings is just getting to know people, is answering questions, and that builds both a culture in the sense of how you want folks to operate. So you err on the side of having a face-to-face meeting because that's something that you can't necessarily do async. And as much you can do async, you kind of learn to do async through this process. So you really learn how the team and the organization communicates by going through this onboarding process in this way.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, it must have been awful years ago before companies really thought about this, right? Can you imagine, right? How stressful that was.
I know when I finished college, and this is going to date me, but I saw some really interesting onboarding practices that were very, very expensive that were trying to do some of this. So this company called National Instruments is an international kind of engineering consulting group, and they produce electronics as well. And what they would do is they would literally fly every single person that started in a given month for that company. And the company is like thousands and thousands of people all in one place. And they would do like a 90-day onboarding together. And I think it was headquartered in like Singapore or something. You build incredibly rich and strong bonds. Can you imagine how costly that onboarding process was from like a just operational point of view? So I do know that it was highly, highly successful, but then the question is, how do you kind of balance that with the ability to, not everyone can fly in for a 90-day onboarding. It assumes that you're kind of a fresh grad. It assumes that you don't have other kinds of family obligations. Not everyone can take off for 90 days and leave their kids, you know, and that kind of thing. So there's lots of assumptions that came into that model, even though they made them successful, that are maybe worth rethinking in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as you said that, I thought about what about people who are, you know, parents, right? Or have other people to look after. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite Jordan to jump in. We're switching a little bit to talking more about hiring here. Jordan.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, in your talk, you discussed the difficulties of hiring people online because of the lack of social cues. I was wondering, do you think that there are platforms, for instance, like LinkedIn, that could be used to help identify social cues, and other platforms, such as GitHub, that would benefit more by having less social cues to divide each other?
It's a good question. Short answer is yes. And I think there's actually companies that do this. This is a service that some companies offer. You submit a resume and they anonymize relevant parts of it that might give away some part of your identity, like gender, nationality, where you currently live, They also anonymize school information because that tends to be something that gives away some amount of privilege. So if you're really looking for scanning through and ensuring you're hiring folks for the skill set that you're looking for and not kind of being influenced by the things that most immediately jump out at you. It's like, oh, I know that this is a good school, or oh, hey, I went there. Like it's a very kind of natural thing that a hiring manager might do, but there are startups that explicitly work to avoid that, and they published research. I haven't read it very closely, but that suggests that this works pretty well, and I can see how that would make sense. It at least results in much more diverse pipelines and talent. And I'll be honest with you, it's a hard problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jordan. I'm going to ask Jonathan Parks if he wants to ask his question. It's also about hiring and the challenges with, jump in.
Yeah, so my question was relating to how conflicts within teams can cause issues with their effectiveness and even turnover rate of employment. Do you think higher focus on the behavioral side of interviews rather than just looking at technical interview side would benefit companies more than how they currently, or how most companies currently do it?
Let me think about that for a second, because my experience looking at the interview process in particular is somewhat limited. So it's going to be heavily colored by a few larger tech companies that I know have the interview process for really well. And I don't know if this generalizes, so I'm going to preface it with that. But intuitively, yes. And actually, we just had this conversation with my team. We were reflecting on how our recent hiring process went and what we could have done better to encourage more diverse talent. And we found that there's a particular drop off at a part of the process that we weren't quite happy with. So what could we do differently? And one of the things that we talked about was, okay, we are front loading a lot of our technical screens, and we're doing a lot of the people things and interaction and how folks kind of communicate towards the later half of the interview. But we should either flip that around or refocus our technical interviews more on conversations around existing projects, on allowing folks to give us characteristics and experiences that are related to some of the things that we're looking for that may not necessarily be the exact blueprint that we're looking for. I could see how that would be incredibly helpful in giving even more opportunity than we have been in the past. So yes, that's the short answer.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jonathan. Actually, there was a paper at FSC this week by Chris Parnan and colleagues on the interviewing process that broke Hacker News, apparently. It was so popular. I'll post that in the cool Reads channel. Let's see, where was I next? Roshan, would you like to jump in? I think we're changing topics here a little bit. Roshan.
Sure. Hi. In your presentation, you spoke about community sourcing the enforcement of norms. Mm-hmm. Do you feel it's better to use bots in this case for enforcing and encouraging norms than community sourcing it, since this might lead to a rift in the community? And so what role do you feel bots or GitHub apps now would have in addressing conflict and promoting a healthy community?
And if I may just add to that, there were actually a few questions about sort of moderating communities, and what to do when issues happen. So I think this question about bots is sort of intriguing along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. The non-human actor as a moderator is a really interesting question, and one that is very tempting. But I guess I could ask that question back to you. I'll give you an example. So let's say there is a Slack chat in a classroom setting, and you're trying to solve the problem of folks using language that can sometimes be offensive or divisive. And someone proposes, hey, let's use a bot, and we will point out when someone is using language that is not within the list of things that we want to see in this channel, and we're going to enforce it. What do you think, what's your intuition behind how the community would respond to that? So taking this from like a open source community context and just into like a classroom setting.
Firstly, it would highly depend upon the accuracy and by which it's being able to detect. And yeah, I'm sort of wondering whether anyone would be disgruntled in this context. I don't know. I mean, it might be a good case to maybe flag it and maybe suggest the person asking a question and reframing the question in a better way, in a more friendlier way, if that's.
Yeah. Something that I like asking folks is, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And in this case, is the problem that we want less of that language or less of something with the moderator bot, or do we want to enable behavior modification, for example? So depending on the outcome, we might choose a different tool for that same process. I'll give you an example. So let's say we are looking at an online community, and we know that there are malicious actors or bots or something that are leaving spammy comments on all of the things and on all of the threads, and it's super annoying. That seems like a really great application for bot level moderation that just kind of scans for things and says, nope, I'm gonna hide this, and like you can report and unhide if you think that this bot doesn't work correctly. In terms of policing human behavior, in general, I think folks kind of have an ick factor towards that when it comes from bots, because it's a punishment without recourse. So you're not really helping folks understand how to behave differently. So in that case, publishing norms ahead of time is probably the more useful, and then in extreme situations, reinforcing them. And whether you do it privately or publicly is actually something that I am curious to see if folks have done studies on, or maybe some of you will do studies on, because I can imagine that can have different results. So let's say you're a human and you want to enforce norms of a community. Do you reach out to someone in a message privately and say, hey, by the way, I think you should do X thing differently. This is not aligned with our community norms, but here's how you could have expressed it better? Or do you call it out and set the tone and set that descriptive norm for the rest of the community? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I'd love to know if someone wants to do that research project.
Thanks, that was really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Great discussion, Roshan. Thanks for starting that. We are just about at the end.
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The students are all starting their course project right now, but I think a lot of them are already set. But so many good ideas coming from our discussion today. We are just about out of our time, and I'm going to just sneak one more question, and if that's okay with you, Anna.
Of course.
From Zane, because it's sort of a topical kind of thing right now. So I'll let Zane jump in and ask his question.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. So yeah, my question is, so effectively treating conflict is not easy. It's pretty difficult. And so when using UI and other strategies to try and manage communities, is there a risk that, an echo chamber of synonymous ideas will persist in such a group, and outside opinion as a result is met with resistance? So as an example, frequently when you go into like a YouTube video, if it's like a relatively popular channel, you'll see that it has a lot of frequent subscribers and comments that support that particular video. But then you'll often see at the top of the comments list, there'll be someone with a polarizing idea, but then immediately based on the UI setup, you'll see that the person's jumped with contrasting ideas. So is that a risk, and how do we kind of manage that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And certainly, I think one of the assumptions that I've made in the past when doing some of this research that I question a lot now is where, so there's a balance between reinforcing norms and kind of maintaining cohesion and preventing churn and actually allowing the community to evolve with its members. And that balance is pretty hard to strike. But we often talk about churn and like people leaving the community as something that is implied to be negative. I would question whether that's always true. To your point about enabling diverse perspectives and outside opinions. So as an example, there are a few cases of open source projects I've studied where communities have split into half over ideological principles. Whether or not it was disruptive for the unity of the community, but did it advance technology? Did it advance the work that the humans were doing in those communities? I think those are kind of also important questions to ask. So I would challenge us to not always assume that preventing churn is the prime directive. Sometimes some amount of healthy churn is helpful to continue keeping a community alive and to prevent this kind of echo chamber effect.
Great question. Thanks, Zane, for asking that. And unfortunately, we have other ones that we can't get to today. But yeah, Anna, yeah, it's very great set of questions here, huh? I think we all really enjoyed watching your keynote and learned a lot from it. A lot of different topics that you covered in that. Do you have anything you want to say before we close out for today?
Just thank you for having me. That talk was one of my first attempts at trying to combine the academic part of my brain and the part of my brain that does kind of managing remote teams for a living now. And so you might see me playing fast and loose with some of the theory, but I appreciate all of the good questions you've had kind of digging into that. That's really awesome. And I have really enjoyed chatting with you and meeting you. Thanks for having me here.